Hello and welcome to the 6th Annual Global Demand Awards, where we celebrate the most in-demand TV, movies, and talent. Today we're joined by Jon S. Baird, the director of Tetris, which is a finalist for the most in-demand European export movie of 2023. Jon, thanks for joining us.
Hi, how you doing?
Pretty good. So let's start with a bit about your background. I know I read that you studied politics at the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. So I'm wondering how you made the transition from that academic experience to ending up directing movies in Hollywood.
It was a long road. I didn't know anybody in the business at all. I didn't get into film school. My grades weren't good enough. So I was kind of semi-interested in politics. And one of the reasons actually for getting involved in Tetris, jumping forward, I'll come back to that in a second, but certainly like Cold War politics and that was of interest to me. But yeah, I didn't know anybody in the industry. Aberdeen is a place very remote in the north part of the UK, northern Scotland. There's no real film industry up there. So as soon as I graduated, I came to London to try and sort of seek my fame and fortune, and it took a long time in a load of sort of menial jobs, going through quite a sort of rough period in my life. Couldn't get into anything, and then all of a sudden the newspaper I was working in had this advert in it for a PA, for a runner for a production company, and my friend who worked in the newspaper said, right, I'm going to tell them there's no more space in the newspaper, and you phone up and tell them that you're available. So it was from a recruitment ad. It was supposed to go into this huge newspaper I was working for at the time, and I phoned up and I got the job, and I really sort of worked my way up from there. I started off making tea at BBC Television, did that for a year, and then just sort of bullied my way into getting experience on set and in production offices and stuff, and really did it from the ground upwards. Learned a lot as I went. So I bought my own camera and started shooting my own inserts for these comedy shows. In fact, John Oliver, who's very big in the States, he's got his own show. I used to direct his inserts for this BBC comedy show as well, way back in the day. I'm talking 20 years ago now. So and that I learned as I went on, and just really sort of like pushed myself forward, and eventually did my first short film, which then led to someone seeing that and asking if I wanted to do a feature. And just so it really came from just a drive that I didn't think was possible at the time. It was a case of I'd always wanted to do it. I never knew how to do it, but I just landed in a situation where I just pushed myself through and grabbed each opportunity. And 25 years now, looking back, it feels like a very short period of time, but there's been a lot of hard work went into it,
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it. And I know you've been able to work with some of the really best in the business, like saw Danny Boyle and Martin Scorsese. Been able to work with them. So could you maybe talk about what you've learned from them and some of the other folks you've collaborated with over the years?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, those two guys in particular, Danny Boyle and Martin Scorsese, were producers on TV shows that I directed. They had done the pilot episode of both of the things, and so they weren't working as directors at the time. I was working as a director under them as producers. But what I really learned from them was if you're a director who's also producing, the tendency is and I have worked with people like this before as well. There's a tendency to get involved and try and put your stamp on it, as opposed to letting the director do their own thing. And both Danny Boyle and Martin Scorsese were so full of grace and really let me do my thing and let me come to them to ask advice. And as a young filmmaker, as a young person, it's a really great thing to have, knowing you've got this great, backup there, who in post-production or if there's anything happening on set will come in and step in for you, but who is not trying to muscle in, And I think only directors or producers who are very like insecure about their own ability to do that, and neither Danny or Martin Scorsese were like that. And I learned a lot from it. And I'm now producing short films for up and coming directors, and I've learned. That's the big thing I've taken. I'm doing one at the moment for this young female director who was my script supervisor on a show I did last year. And one of the big things was to really leave her to kind of make her own mistakes as well, but also to give her the confidence. And I'll always be here. I won't be sitting next to you at the monitor. I'll be sitting, I'll be offset, or I'll be wherever if needs be. But the team need to look at you for leadership, and that's what both Danny and Martin gave me, yeah, as opposed to any practical sort of advice on set,
Very cool. So yeah, let's talk more specifically about Tetris.
Yeah.
First, how did the script end up, I guess, in your hands?
Well, I was writing the Kingsman 3 sequel. Yeah, I was attached to direct that, and I was working with Marv, who are the production company who do the Kingsman movies, and the Kingsman prequel. So the one that Harris Dickinson and Ralph Fiennes were in was come to the end of post, but there were things that were stopping that from getting released, and because that wasn't getting released, the Kingsman 3 kept on getting pushed back, and then COVID hit. But in the meantime, this script had gone to Marv, this Tetris script, and had said, if anybody who wants to do this. And I was working with Taron Egerton at the time, obviously on Kingsman 3. So it seemed like a very sort of natural progression to say, right, you guys have been working together. There's a bit of an understanding. Is there something we can jump onto this one instead? And that's really how it all came around, was because I'm working on a different movie franchise, and then this thing. And to be honest, Tetris is probably far more my kind of movie than Kingsman 3 would have been. I did enjoy, working on that project and getting it to a particular point in time. I don't even know if that film is going to be made, but I really loved the experience on it. But yeah, that's how it all came around. It was through working on something else and then just taking a sidestep like this. And when I read the script, I was like, oh great! I was so surprised. I'd never heard of this story. I was not a massive Tetris I was not a massive gamer. As I say, I did politics. So I was really interested in the more political side of things, and that's what drew my interest into Cold War sort of politics, and then this fascinating story on top.
Yeah, totally. And I was going to ask if you knew any of the backstory, but I guess you learned about it reading the script first.
Yeah, I didn't know the backstory, and I was so fascinated with it. And I thought, right, I have to make this movie because I want people to feel like I did the first time I read the script. When they see the film, about, wow, that's a story that's been so well kept and so well hidden, and why hasn't it been told before? And I felt very sort of lucky to be able to be the one who goes and tells this story.
Yeah, so that brings up your, I guess, like academic experience. Did you specifically study like the fall of the Soviet Union, or what were you mostly interested in?
I didn't study. It was just because I was of such a formative age. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, it was the day before my 17th birthday. It fell on the 9th of November, and it was the day before my 17th birthday. And at the time, I was like looking to see what I would do with my life in terms of, further education. So all that was happening around about the time. So I ended up doing international relations and politics. Those were the things. And it wasn't specifically just about the fall of the Soviet Union, but because that had just happened, or it was literally just happening at the time as I was studying, that was coming into, a lot of it. And I was always fascinated by, the split between East and West, because we knew so little. It wasn't like these days where you can pick up your phone or find out anything about any country. And we thought these people were living on a different planet, and likewise they did with us as well. It was such a, it was, there might have been Martians, because we knew so little about the East. So that was what was fascinating to me. And then once I started to meet people from that part of the world, obviously realize, as the Berlin Wall fell and communism sort of collapsed that side of the world, you realize, they thought exactly the same. So I thought that would make a compelling story, and you see that in a film with Henk and Alexei when there's a lot of suspicions with each other, and that's really what it was like back then. Even now, it's this, with the whole Ukraine conflict and what's happening at the moment in that part of the world, that has started to come back into the geopolitical landscape, the whole sort of mistrust between East and West, which had died away for quite some time, but it seems to be coming back.
Yeah, it does. It does seem like making this movie was quite the undertaking. I know there was some COVID production complications. You basically turned Scotland into the Soviet Union. You were filming in 3 different languages. So can you talk about how you approached all that and clearly overcame it in the end?
Yeah, well, it's funny you said that we filmed up in Scotland. That was the last place I thought recreating the Soviet Union would work, and we were sort of kind of boxed into a corner. We wanted to shoot in Eastern Europe, and then when COVID hit, we couldn't travel, so we were sort of in the UK, and we thought London first. Didn't work out for the aesthetic, and then the production manager actually went, and this is where the Aberdeen connection, the University of Aberdeen where I studied at, we ended up shooting a load of the scenes at the University of Aberdeen because it's got this incredible brutalist architecture and buildings that I had gone and studied in. I had never thought of at the time I would ever be back here to make a movie, and it came full circle. It came full circle back to there. It was great to do that because they had never had a big movie up there. It's a city, but it's so remote that nothing is ever shot there. So to bring a big film up there, we had a lot of excitement around the town. People were coming out in their hundreds to see us shooting, and for me as a local guy, it was a very proud moment, to take a big Hollywood movie up there and big Hollywood stars and really to put my own town on the map. So that gave me a lot of impetus not to screw things up, and not to mess things up. That I'm representing my hometown, representing my country. I think weirdly enough, COVID helped with the detail of stuff because there was absolutely no distractions whatsoever. It's not like when we made the film, because what it's like. You make a movie and a lot of times the crew are going out together and socializing and there's this, that, and the other. We were literally working 24/7 because there was nothing else to do, And I think a lot of that fed into our obsession with the movie, and to get everything right in terms of the languages. As you said, we were using English, Japanese, and Russian. The amount of detail you have to have for those different cultures as well. And I think COVID actually really helped. I mean, it was a pain in the ass because the testing and the distancing and everything else that everybody else had to deal with. And we were one of the first movies to go through it all. We were one of the first out of the gate. But I actually, weirdly enough, it kind of helped to focus the mind. It focused the mind on just being obsessed with that, and because there was no restaurants to go to, there was no bars to go to, there was nothing to do apart from make a film, be obsessed with it.
That's pretty cool. I haven't really heard that take on COVID before, but it is kind of true. I feel like.
Do you know what? Honestly, it just came to me just now because when you asked the question, I was like, "How am I going to answer this?" And I thought, well, looking back on it, that's exactly what it was. It was just that. It was just like literally, we would be staying at work rather than going home on our own.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, honestly, I think personally, like myself and several of my colleagues really got our stuff together during COVID because it was like, well, we got nothing else to do. Might as well do the best we can at our jobs, So,
exactly. Same thing. Yeah.
I can relate to that. And you talked about, I guess, the sort of seeming growing gap between East and West in Europe and certainly other places in the world. Can you talk about, the importance of telling these multicultural stories that Tetris did?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think it's part of cinema, really. I think people always try and look for universal stories, right? They look for universal stories, and then so why not combine all that with multicultural? How more relevant is it to do something that is multicultural to make something feel universal as well, right? That people can relate to in a wide scale, and how to you know, how to show cultures coming together as humans, as we're on one planet. You know, with a strong message being that, you know, cultures that are maybe on the page, not aligned with each other, you know, can work together. It's a very human thing, right? It's a very human thing. And I don't go out to, I have to say, I don't go out to say, right, I'm going to make a multicultural movie, right? But like I go out to make a human story, right? I'll go out to make a real human story, and if it includes multiculturalism, then great. I mean, my favorite movie out of this year is Past Lives. I think it's the best film. I think it's the best film. So I'll be watching, you know, Korean cinema or French cinema or any of that, and I would do a movie. I mean, if you say, oh, would you do a Korean movie? I'm like, yeah, why not, right? I mean, I'm gonna need a translator, but why not? So, but I look at it from a human point of view first. Where's the humanity in it? And if it does decide to be multicultural, great, because I think we're in a place where the world needs that more than any time in the recent future, I think, you know.
Definitely. I think the human element in Tetris was certainly the relationship between Hank and Alexei, and it seems like, you know, I think this movie certainly benefited from having the real versions of them as being involved in the production. So can you talk about their level of involvement? And I'm wondering, like, were they attached at the beginning, or did you kind of like have to recruit them on?
No, they were, when I got attached, they had already been involved in the script, yeah. Given notes. I mean, their notes weren't narrative notes, because I think at the start they hadn't been involved in film production before, so there was very much, oh, it never happened like that, it happened like this, right? And we were like, well, no, we have to you know, condense time periods, like merge characters to make this into more of a film, because it's not a documentary. So schooling them, and that was important as well. And they're tech guys as well. They're not sort of film guys or story guys. But as in most things that I have done based on real people or real events, they get it. They come around, they get it, they accept it. They both of them met the people who they were playing before over Zoom. They didn't meet them in person because of COVID. So they gave some, you know, advice on things, but they were never on set. They came for, I think they came for one day on one of the pickup days, but they were never on set during the main shoot. They weren't really involved in the edit process either. They weren't involved in the edit process, but what they did do, and I'm eternally grateful for them for this, they promoted this film with the utmost sort of gusto and energy, and they did so much press interviews, did so much at South by Southwest, and they really got behind the film. Not only them, but all their families as well. And I had such a great humbling experience with them at South by Southwest when I saw them all together, and you know, and I met some of the extended family that I hadn't met. I worked quite closely with Maya, who's Hank's daughter, who now is like the head of Tetris. I went out to Hawaii to see her. They're based out there. But in terms of the actual production of the film, they had less to do, a little bit of script advice, massive amount of promotion, you know, and as I say, have become friends, and eternally grateful to these guys.
That's great. So yeah, I did want to ask, you know, was there a specific time where you had to be like, this isn't a documentary, we kind of need to keep things going?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, especially with Hank, I think. No, in fact, no, especially with Alex. It was weird, and their characters show this in the film. I think Alexei, being more the computer programmer and being everything about fact and stuff, was more about, okay, this is how it was. And Hank was kind of sometimes like, maybe wanted his character to be even more heroic, and it was like, no, you've got to be flawed. You've got to be flawed to be heroic, right? You can't just be like us be the hero from page one right through, you know. So that was actually pretty funny. But yeah, there was a few times. I think Alexei was nervous in some of the stuff in the USSR stuff, that because he grew up in that sort of paranoid, looking over your shoulder thing. So he didn't want to upset anybody unnecessarily, which we completely took on board. But yeah, they were great. You know, they were great. Listen, I've done a lot of these true story things, and I think if you're honest with people from the very beginning, and you hear them out, and you just say, "Listen, this is not my first rodeo. I've done this before," and I did it with Stan and Ollie, with Stan Laurel's great granddaughter. I did it in my first movie as well, called Cass, and I'm now, you know, very good friends with the subject of that film. It's, you know, you just have to be straight with people, you know, that, and you get 10 times back from them.
Definitely. So when the movie was first announced, there was a lot of predictable kind of snark on the internet about, like, how can this be a movie? Obviously, people who, like myself, didn't know the backstory. Like, are there any lessons about, I guess, like, kind of mining atypical IP for stories here?
Well, for me, getting involved in anything, right? I've been offered a lot of true story stuff over the last few years, right? Because of Stan and Ollie, because of Tetris, and I want, even if it's like the biggest brand, like a lot of people are putting brands forward, right? And going, oh, there's this brand, right? Or there's this brand v this brand, right? And I'm like, yeah, well, I'd make a great film. Well, what's the story? Where's the human sort of aspect in it? Oh, well, now we know there's been examples of that. We know that there's been examples of movies that have been about brands or setting, you know, bits of technology or whatever that have done better than others. And for me, it's always, the lesson is, forget about the brand first. If this was just a story about something else, like if Tetris hadn't been about Tetris, if Tetris had been about some other thing, would it still have worked about this fish out of water going to into the middle of the Soviet Union and putting his life on the line and making his friendship with this guy? What is the most important thing about Tetris? Is it about the game? I don't think so at all. I think it's about getting something out of this culture that was so protective and so paranoid, and how everybody was risking things for each other, and the humanity that's brought together, and the brotherhood and the friendship and stuff. That's why Tetris works. It's not because there's fancy little graphics dancing around the page. You know, that's not why Tetris works as a movie. Not for me, anyway. So you need so you maybe have your IP, you have your brand and stuff. You have to have them humanity, and I think that's always the thing. You have to look for that first, you know.
That's a great message. And just one more. I thought, I just, you know, watching the movie, I was impressed. I thought there's just a very clear vision from start to finish, and I think that's, you know, ultimately lies with the director. So wondering, you know, how you did that, and I guess advice for anyone watching, you know.
Well, I think that it's in this particular show, right? We had great visual effects guys. You know, we had really great visual effects guys, and I think it's very important, if you're going to have a movie that's heavy on visual effects, don't wait until post to rely on those guys. The key person in your visual effects or your graphics is the on-set guy, and we had this fantastic guy called Jody Johnson, who was our MVP, I think, you know, and his vision was as much how this film succeeded as anything, because I hadn't done a lot of sort of visual effects movies, and I learned so much from this guy. I was very concentrated on the dramatic aspect and the East versus West kind of like Cold War thriller style movie, yeah. And I made that film, and it was later in post where the rest of the more fun elements had sort of started to feed in, and at one point we put too much in, and it was too gimmicky, and it felt like. And then it was like, it's like baking a cake, you know. It's like you got too much salt in there. It's whatever, right? You need to balance up the ingredients, right? And that's what making Tetris is very much about. If we put too much in of it, it'd be too gimmicky. If we didn't put enough in, then the Game Boy fans weren't going to be as satisfied in terms of how the film looked. So it wasn't. I have to say, I didn't come into this way. I know exactly how this film's going to be. I knew how the narrative was going to play out. I knew how the friendship was going to play out. I knew how the East-West, the Japanese culture and the Russian culture and everything mixing. I knew how it was going to work. I knew how the Maxwells were going to work. I didn't know how much of the other stuff was going to come in until we started testing the film, you know, putting stuff in there. So the vision came. It's like when you go for an eye test, right? Okay, you sit there and you read the board, right? You can't read all the, like, especially with me, I'm pretty much fucking blind, right? And sorry for swearing, but you know, you get the next lens in, and then eventually you see, right? You get the clear, and it was like that. It was like layers and layers and layers on. It wasn't just straight from the beginning. We know how this is going to be. It was like, okay, this is a trial and error thing, and and it was a good fun doing it. You know, it was really good fun. But so a lot of people involved in getting this film to where it ended up. I can't take all the credit.
All right. I think we'll pretty much leave it there, but thank you so much, Jon S. Baird, director of Tetris.
Thank you very much indeed.